The Navy training base was alive with the sound of boots pounding against the gravel, the harsh whistle of instructors carrying over the salty air, and the occasional bark of orders echoing off the low-slung barracks. It was the kind of place built to strip away comfort, built to test men until they broke and only the strongest remained. Among those men was Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reeves, a decorated Navy SEAL officer with a reputation that seemed to follow him like a shadow. His men respected him, feared him even, but they also knew he carried an arrogance that no battlefield could seem to wash out. Jackson liked to talk, and more than that, he liked to brag. He wasn't content with being one of the most lethal soldiers the Navy had ever trained. He had to remind everyone of it. That morning, during a rare break in the training schedule, a group of visiting civilians had been invited onto the base. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes family members of officers or donors to military programs came through, given a chance to see demonstrations and learn about the life these men lived. Among them was a woman who, at first glance, seemed to have no place there. Her clothes were plain, her demeanor quiet, and when the introductions were made, no one remembered her name. She didn't volunteer it loudly, didn't laugh or chatter the way some of the other visitors did. She simply observed, her eyes taking in everything, the obstacle courses, the weapon racks, the brutal drills. She didn't look impressed, but she didn't look out of place either. Just calm. It didn't take long for Jackson to notice her. The officer had been standing with his team, entertaining the visitors with stories of night raids and impossible missions. His voice carried the weight of someone who knew he was the center of attention, and most of the civilians seemed captivated. But the plain woman? She just stood there, arms folded, listening quietly. No awe, no wide-eyed wonder. Almost as if she'd seen it all before. And that, more than anything, bothered Jackson. "So," he said suddenly, his voice cutting across the group. "What do you think? Think you could last 10 minutes in SEAL training? Or is this all a little too much for you?" His smirk made it clear the question wasn't meant kindly. The woman glanced at him. Her gaze wasn't sharp, wasn't defensive. It was almost soft, almost polite, but it didn't waver. "I think anyone can surprise you," she replied simply. The group laughed lightly, some nervously, unsure whether she was joking. Jackson chuckled, shaking his head. "Trust me, ma'am, no one can surprise me. We've seen every type of person try. Strong guys, smart guys, athletes, professionals. And they all break. SEAL training finds the limit of a human being. I know exactly where those limits are. And I can tell you right now, you wouldn't last one day." The words carried a sting, but the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "You sound very certain," she said, her tone still gentle, almost curious. "Damn right I'm certain," Jackson replied, puffing his chest out a little. "No one out there can touch me. No one can outshoot me, outrun me, outfight me. No one can hit that target cleaner, faster, or harder than I can. That's why I'm here. That's why I lead men who are legends." "No one can hit that?" the woman repeated softly. Her eyes had shifted, almost lazily, toward the firing range where a series of steel targets stood, their surfaces gleaming in the morning sun. Jackson caught her glance and smirked again. "You see those? That's a 300-yard shot with a sidearm. Most trained shooters can't even touch the steel. I can hit it 10 times out of 10. No misses. That's what separates SEALs from everyone else. That's why no one can do what we do." The visitors murmured, impressed, and one of the other officers clapped Jackson on the back. But the woman only nodded slowly, as if filing away the information. Then she said something so quietly that for a moment the group didn't react at all. "Would you like me to try?" The words hung in the air, almost absurd. The civilians blinked, glancing between her and Jackson as though waiting for him to laugh. And laugh he did, though it was more of a bark than anything else. "You? Try. Lady, do you even know how to hold a weapon? This isn't a carnival game. That target out there is smaller than your hand and 3 football fields away. I've seen seasoned Marines miss every shot. What makes you think you could even come close?" Her shoulders lifted in a faint shrug. "You said no one can hit it. I just want to see if that's true." There was no arrogance in her tone, no challenge laced with venom. It was as if she were asking to try a new dish at dinner. Calm, unhurried, simple. But to Jackson, it landed like an insult. He felt his pride bristle, the amused chuckles of his men spurring him further. "Fine," he said finally, gesturing toward the range. "Let's see what you've got. But don't cry when you miss every shot. This isn't a place for games." A sergeant nearby, still holding a sidearm from earlier demonstrations, hesitated before offering it to her. His eyebrows rose as she accepted it without hesitation, checking the chamber, the safety, the weight. Her hands moved with a practiced familiarity, Not flashy, not showy, but confident. Some of the SEALs noticed and frowned, though they kept quiet. She stepped forward to the firing line, her posture loose but balanced, and raised the weapon. For a long moment the air was still. The visitors leaned forward, the SEALs crossed their arms, and Jackson smirked as though he already knew the outcome. Then the shot cracked through the air, sharp and ringing, and the steel target at 300 yards sang with the unmistakable sound of a direct hit. Silence. The woman lowered the weapon slightly as though she'd only been warming up and fired again. Another hit. The third, the fourth, each one landed with the same clear metallic ping. 5 shots in 5 seconds. 5 perfect hits. Jackson's smirk had frozen, his mouth half open, his eyes locked on the distant steel plates still vibrating from impact. His men exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some trying to hide their surprise. The civilians whispered in awe, one or two even clapping lightly before realizing the mood had shifted. The woman set the weapon down gently, safe and precise, and turned back to Jackson. Her face was still calm, almost apologetic, as though she hadn't meant to embarrass him. "Looks like someone can hit that after all," she said quietly. For the first time in years, Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reeves didn't have a reply. The silence after the shot still hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Jackson's men stood awkwardly, not sure whether to laugh, applaud, or look away. For soldiers who had been trained to show nothing but discipline, their discomfort was obvious. Jackson himself was caught somewhere between disbelief and fury. His pride had taken a blow he hadn't expected, and though he tried to mask it with a forced grin, the tension in his jaw betrayed him. He stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, pacing like a predator trying to recover its footing. "All right," he said finally, his voice louder than it needed to be, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Beginner's luck. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. That doesn't mean you're special. One neat trick doesn't prove anything." The woman didn't answer. She simply looked at him with the same calm expression, the kind of quiet gaze that unsettled men. More than 100 shouted insults. Jackson hated it. He needed her to flinch, to stumble, to show weakness. "Tell you what," he continued, his eyes narrowing. "If you're so sure you can handle yourself, let's make this a little more interesting. We'll run you through one of the drills. Nothing too hard, just something to prove whether you're anything more than a lucky shot. That way everyone here can see the difference between a civilian and a SEAL." A ripple of interest went through the group. The visitors leaned closer, clearly curious. Some of the SEALs smirked, eager to watch what they assumed would be a humiliating defeat. The woman, however, simply nodded once, her expression unchanged. "All right," she said softly. Jackson gestured sharply, and within minutes the range was reset. A course was laid out, targets at varying distances, dummies representing hostiles and hostages, obstacles to vault and crawl beneath. It was a condensed version of a drill every SEAL had run 100 times, designed to test speed, accuracy, and endurance. For someone untrained, it would be overwhelming. For Jackson, it was an easy stage to reassert his dominance. He stepped forward first, motioning to the crowd. "Watch closely," he said, his grin returning. "This is how professionals do it." When the signal came, he launched into motion like a coiled spring. His feet pounded against the dirt, his body weaving fluidly through the obstacles. Every shot cracked sharp and fast, each target falling in smooth succession. He vaulted a wall, slid under a barrier, spun and fired without hesitation. The entire course was a demonstration of muscle memory, honed reflexes, and relentless training. When he crossed the finish line, the timer beeped at 1 minute and 22 seconds. Every target hit, no hostages missed. Clean, efficient, professional. The visitors applauded, some openly amazed. Jackson turned, chest heaving slightly, and gave a cocky nod toward the woman. "Top that," he said. The sergeant reset the course again, replacing the fallen targets. The woman stepped forward without a word, adjusting the weapon she'd been handed. She took her place at the line, her posture deceptively relaxed. For a moment the air grew tense again, every eye fixed on her. Then the signal came. She moved. Not with the explosive speed of Jackson, but with something stranger, something steadier. Every step was measured, her body flowing like water through the obstacles. Where Jackson had attacked the course like a soldier storming a battlefield, she glided through it as if the path itself belonged to her. The first shot rang out, clean, precise. Then another and another. Each one struck its target with surgical perfection. By the halfway mark, murmurs were already starting. The way she handled the weapon wasn't clumsy or hesitant. It wasn't even just practiced, it was instinctive, natural. Her movements weren't wasted. She vaulted the wall with smooth efficiency, slid under the barrier without breaking rhythm, and fired again before most watching could even process it. The final shot cracked the air, the last target dropping with a metallic clang, and she crossed the finish line. The timer beeped. 1 minute and 15 seconds. 7 seconds faster than Jackson. For a moment no one moved. The visitors looked at the screen, then back at her, then at Jackson, as though waiting for someone to explain what they had just witnessed. The SEALs shifted uncomfortably, some frowning, others trying to hide their shock. Jackson's face had gone stiff. He stepped forward quickly, waving off the timer as though it were malfunctioning. No, that's not right, he snapped. She cheated the corners or the targets weren't properly reset. Run it again. That doesn't count. The woman only looked at him, her voice calm but firm. Would you like me to? The sergeant glanced between them, uneasy. Jackson hesitated, his pride clawing at him. If she repeated it, if she proved it again, there'd be no room left for excuses. And yet backing down meant admitting he'd been beaten. His jaw tightened as he barked. Fine. Run it again. The course was reset once more. The woman took her place at the line, weapon ready. The signal came, and once again she moved with that same unnerving calm. Shot after shot landed. Her pace never faltered. And when she crossed the finish line this time, the timer beeped at 1 minute and 14 seconds. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. She lowered the weapon, carefully engaging the safety before setting it down. Then she turned back toward Jackson, her expression unchanged, her tone almost gentle. It seems I can top that. The visitors erupted in quiet applause, some openly cheering now. Even a few SEALs couldn't help but nod, impressed despite themselves. Jackson stood rigid, his fists clenched, his pride burning hotter than ever. He forced a laugh, though it came out thin and strained. Cute trick. But drills aren't real combat. Out there, when bullets fly, it's a whole different world. You'd never last in a fight. The woman regarded him steadily. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you'd be surprised again. The way she said it, not with arrogance but with quiet certainty, made the hairs rise on the back of more than one neck. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jackson's forced laugh hadn't convinced anyone, least of all himself. He could feel the eyes of his men on him, the civilians whispering, the weight of humiliation pressing down harder than any battlefield wound he had ever taken. A civilian woman had outshot him, outpaced him, twice in a row, and she had done it with a calm grace that made his own effort look clumsy in comparison. He couldn't let it end there. Fine, he said, his voice low but sharp, carrying the dangerous edge of a man backed into a corner. If you really think you belong out here, let's stop playing games. You want to prove yourself? Step into the ring with me. The murmurs grew louder at that. The ring was little more than a matted section of ground inside the training compound where SEALs sparred to sharpen their hand-to-hand combat skills. It was a place where bruises, blood, and broken bones weren't accidents. They were lessons. No civilian had ever been invited to step onto that mat, and certainly not against an officer like Jackson. The idea seemed absurd, yet no one dared speak against him. The woman tilted her head slightly, considering. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation, only that same unsettling calm. If that's what you want, she said quietly. Jackson's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good. Let's see how long you last. Within minutes, the group had shifted to the sparring area. The visitors crowded around, some with nervous anticipation, others with eager curiosity. The SEALs stood in a tighter cluster, arms crossed, expressions hard. Most assumed it would be quick. Jackson would take her down, end it cleanly, and balance would be restored. But a small, unspoken doubt lingered in the air. They had seen her shoot. They had seen her run the course. And now they wondered what else she was hiding. Jackson stepped onto the mat first, rolling his shoulders, loosening his neck with deliberate intimidation. He removed his uniform top, revealing a body carved from years of punishing training, broad shoulders, hard muscle, every inch a weapon. He looked every bit the soldier, the predator ready to pounce. The woman stepped up opposite him. She didn't remove anything, didn't roll her shoulders or stretch. She simply walked onto the mat, her steps unhurried, her posture relaxed. If anything, she looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong place and was about to apologize. The contrast between them was almost laughable, except no one was laughing. Rules are simple, Jackson said, his voice carrying for everyone to hear. First one to be pinned or tapped or unable to continue loses. No cheap shots, no weapons. Just skill. The woman gave a small nod. The sergeant raised his hand, then dropped it. Begin. Jackson moved first, lunging forward with the speed of a man who had spent years ending fights before they began. His hand shot out, aiming to grab her arm and twist it into a lock that would force her down. But before he could make contact, she shifted, not violently, not with brute force, but with a smooth, almost effortless sidestep. His momentum carried him past her, his grip closing on empty air. A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. Jackson spun, faster this time, his fists raised. He launched a jab toward her head, sharp and precise. Again she moved, her body tilting just enough for the strike to miss by an inch. No wasted energy, no panic. Just calm evasion. Jackson's jaw tightened. He pressed harder, his strikes coming faster now, combinations designed to overwhelm. Punches, elbows, a sudden low kick meant to sweep her legs out from under her. Each time she slipped away, her movements fluid, controlled, almost like a dance. He hadn't touched her once. The murmurs around the ring grew louder. Even some of the SEALs began to exchange uneasy looks. They knew how fast Jackson was, how dangerous his strikes could be. The fact that she was dodging them so easily was something they couldn't explain. Jackson snarled, frustrated, and went for a grapple. This time he managed to get his arms around her, locking her in a hold that would crush most opponents. He braced, ready to slam her into the mat. For a heartbeat it seemed he had her. Then, in a blur of motion, she shifted her weight, dropped her center of gravity, and twisted. The next thing anyone knew, Jackson was flat on his back, the air driven from his lungs as she pinned him with a leverage hold that left him trapped, his own strength working against him. The crowd gasped. Jackson struggled, thrashing violently, but her grip was precise, unyielding. She wasn't using brute force, she was using his momentum, his position, against him. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free. His face flushed with rage and humiliation. "Do you yield?" she asked softly, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Never," he growled, twisting harder. Her hold tightened, just enough to remind him of his disadvantage. He grimaced, teeth gritted, veins standing out on his neck. For a long moment, it seemed he would rather break than give in. Then, with a roar of frustration, his hands slapped the mat. "Tap out." The sergeant blew the whistle. The match was over. The woman released him immediately, stepping back with the same calm composure she had shown from the beginning. Jackson lay on the mat, breathing hard, his pride in shreds, his body aching more from humiliation than pain. Around them, the crowd erupted, shocked whispers from the civilians, low murmurs from the SEALs, even a few stunned exclamations from those who couldn't believe what they'd just seen. She offered him a hand to help him up. He slapped it away and pushed himself to his feet, his eyes burning with fury. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice rough. "One lucky move doesn't mean anything. You don't belong here." The woman regarded him quietly. "It wasn't luck," she said softly. "It was knowing how to listen. How to move. How to let someone's anger do the work for me." Her words weren't boastful. They weren't even sharp. But they cut deeper than any insult. Jackson clenched his fists, his pride screaming for another round, but the eyes of his men on him stopped him cold. They had seen it. They had seen him beaten, cleanly and fairly. To demand more would only make it worse. For the first time in years, the SEAL officer felt the weight of doubt pressing down on him. And the woman, the simple, unremarkable woman who had walked onto the base that morning unnoticed, had put it there. The crowd slowly began to disperse from the sparring mat, but the whispers followed the woman wherever she walked. Some of the civilians could barely contain their excitement, talking in hushed tones about what they had just witnessed. Even the SEALs, trained to remain composed no matter what, couldn't stop their sideways glances, their exchanged looks, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Who was she? Jackson stalked off the mat, his chest heaving with anger, his pride in ruins. He had been humiliated twice already, and now a third time, in the most personal way possible, beaten in hand-to-hand combat in front of his men. Every instinct in him screamed to fight again, to demand another chance to reassert his dominance. But he couldn't. The look in the eyes of his SEALs told him that. They had witnessed something undeniable. Pushing the issue would only make him look smaller. And that was unbearable. The woman, however, seemed untouched by the chaos she had stirred. She moved quietly back toward the sidelines, her demeanor unchanged as if none of it had mattered at all. She wasn't gloating, she wasn't celebrating, and that made it all the more unsettling. It was easier to dismiss arrogance, it was much harder to dismiss quiet certainty. One of the younger SEALs, a corporal named Davis, couldn't hold back his curiosity. He stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, where did you learn to fight like that?" The woman glanced at him, her eyes soft but unreadable. "Here and there," she said simply. It wasn't an answer, and yet it silenced him. Something in the way she said it suggested more than she revealed. A couple of the other SEALs exchanged knowing looks. They had seen fighters before, athletes, martial artists, even professionals, but this was something else. Her movements weren't rehearsed or flashy. They were efficient, instinctive, the kind you didn't learn in a gym. They were the kind you only learned through experience, through survival. Jackson, still seething, snapped, "She's nobody. Don't waste your time." But even as he said it, the doubt in his voice betrayed him. The sergeant who had overseen the sparring session frowned slightly, his arms crossed. He wasn't as quick to dismiss her. His years of service had taught him to pay attention to details others overlooked. And what he had seen was no accident, no coincidence. This woman moved like someone who had been in real fights, maybe even wars. He didn't say anything, but the thought stuck with him. Later that day, the visitors were given a tour of the base facilities. Jackson stayed distant, his mood dark and his pride wounded, while the other SEALs carried out the routine explanations. The woman walked quietly among the group, her gaze wandering over the equipment, the training areas, the weapons. Nothing about her seemed outwardly remarkable, but every now and then her eyes lingered too long on certain details. The way a rifle was stored, the angle of a surveillance camera, the code punched into a secured door. Observations no ordinary visitor would have noticed. Davis noticed. He hung back a little, watching her. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than she appeared. Finally, when the group paused by the armory, he leaned toward her. "You're not just a tourist, are you?" he whispered. She turned her head, meeting his gaze with that same calm expression. For a moment he thought she might ignore the question. Then, softly, she said, "Sometimes it's better to let people believe what they want to believe." It wasn't an answer, but it was enough to send a shiver down his spine. As the tour wound down, the visitors were gathered in the mess hall for refreshments. Jackson stayed near the back, glaring daggers at the woman, his pride still stinging. The civilians chatted excitedly, the SEALs stood watchful, and the woman sat quietly at one of the tables, sipping from a glass of water. She looked perfectly at ease, as though nothing had happened. That was when one of the higher-ranking officers, Captain Harris, entered the room. His presence commanded immediate respect. Conversations hushed, soldiers straightened, and even Jackson's scowl softened slightly. Harris had been in the Navy long enough to recognize tension when he saw it, and he could feel it radiating off the room. His gaze landed on the woman almost instantly. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. No one answered immediately. Jackson shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to speak. Finally, Davis cleared his throat. She's one of the visitors, sir. But she ran the course earlier. Beat Lieutenant Commander Reeves' time. Twice. And she sparred him. And won." Harris's brows lifted slightly. His eyes flicked to Jackson, who looked away. Then back to the woman. He studied her for a long moment, his experienced gaze weighing her without words. "Interesting," Harris said finally. "Very interesting." The woman set her glass down, meeting his gaze evenly. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she said softly. "He challenged me. I only responded." Her voice carried no malice, but it carried truth. Harris nodded once, as if he believed her. Still, the curiosity in his eyes didn't fade. "You've had training?" he said. It wasn't a question. The woman's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "Here and there." The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances again. Harris held her gaze for a long time, then finally gave a small nod. "Enjoy your visit," he said before turning away. But his eyes lingered on her for just a moment longer, as though filing away her face, her presence, her mystery. As the evening drew to a close, the civilians were escorted off the base. Jackson stalked away, refusing to look at her, his pride still burning. Davis watched her leave, still troubled by the questions that now filled his head. And Harris, though he said nothing more, knew deep down that he had just witnessed something rare, something dangerous, something extraordinary hidden in the form of a woman who called herself Simple. When the transport van pulled away, carrying the visitors back to the city, the base returned to its routine. But the memory of her lingered. Whispers would circulate among the SEALs for weeks, about the woman who had outshot, outrun, and outfought their officer. The woman who moved like a ghost and left no answers behind. And Jackson? His pride would not let it rest. As he watched the van disappear into the distance, he swore silently to himself that this wasn't over. One way or another, he would uncover who she really was. And when he did, he would make her regret ever stepping onto his base. Jackson couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, the events replaying in his head on a merciless loop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, calm, unshaken, almost indifferent, as she bested him again and again. The sting of humiliation was unbearable. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, unchallengeable, the gold standard of what it meant to be a SEAL. And yet in front of his men, in front of civilians, he had been dismantled by someone who claimed to be nothing more than a visitor. He clenched his fists, grinding his teeth. No. He wouldn't let it end there. He needed to know who she was, needed to uncover the truth. Because no simple woman walked into a Navy SEAL training compound and humiliated an officer 3 times in one day. No civilian moved like that, fought like that, shot like that. She was hiding something and he was going to find out what. By morning, Jackson was already in the communications office, leaning over one of the intelligence officers. "Run her name," he ordered. "The visitor from yesterday. I want everything, background checks, travel history, employment records. If she's on any government watch list, if she's tied to any military or agency, I want to know." The officer hesitated. "Sir, with respect, civilians who come on base are cleared through official channels. If we dig deeper without authorization, it could raise red flags." Jackson's glare hardened. "Consider this authorization. I'll take the heat if anyone asks." The officer reluctantly began typing, pulling up the visitor log. "Name?" Jackson froze. He realized then he had never actually asked. He had been too focused on mocking her, on dismissing her. He remembered faces, voices, movements, but not her name. Grinding his teeth, he leaned over the log. His eyes scanned the list until he found it. Elena Cole. "Run it," he snapped. The officer entered the name. For a moment, nothing came up. Then lines of information filled the screen. Jackson leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. Born in Kansas. Ordinary schooling. No criminal record. No military service. Employed as a freelance consultant. Details vague, no specific field listed. Travel history, extensive. Too extensive. Europe, Asia, South America, the Middle East. Dozens of countries, some with little reason for a civilian to visit, especially alone. And then there were the gaps. Months at a time with no record of location, no credit card activity, no digital footprint. Jackson's frown deepened. "That's not a consultant. That's a ghost." The officer shifted uneasily. "Sir, it could be classified. If she's with intelligence, we won't find much more." Jackson slammed a hand on the desk. "Keep digging. There's something here. I don't care if you have to pull satellite records, travel manifests, whatever. I want to know who the hell she really is." By noon, Jackson had what he wanted, or rather what he feared. The gaps in her history lined up almost perfectly with major covert operations around the world. A coup in South America. A hostage rescue in Eastern Europe. A silent but devastating blow against a terrorist network in the Middle East. None of them officially connected to her, but the timing was too precise to ignore. Jackson leaned back, his mind racing. She wasn't just some civilian. She was something else, something higher, something buried in shadows. CIA? Special Forces? A Black Ops ghost? Whatever she was, she had stepped into his world and exposed him in front of his own men. The humiliation twisted into obsession. He needed to confront her again. He needed to prove himself, to take back what she had stolen from him. But more than that, he needed to drag the truth into the light. That evening he called in Davis. The young SEAL entered his quarters nervously, still remembering the spectacle of the day before. Jackson fixed him with a hard stare. "You spoke to her?" Jackson said flatly. Davis shifted. "Yes, sir. Briefly." "What did she tell you?" "Nothing direct, sir. Just something about letting people believe what they want. But she knew things. You could see it. She wasn't normal." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. She's hiding. And I'm going to find out why." Davis hesitated. "Sir, with respect, maybe we should just leave it. If she is with intelligence, we could be walking into something above our clearance." Jackson's expression hardened into steel. "She embarrassed me in front of my men. If I let that stand, I lose everything: respect, authority, command. No. This doesn't end until I expose her for what she really is. She wanted to play games on my base? Fine. But next time it'll be on my terms." The next week, Jackson put his plan into motion. He arranged for another demonstration session for visiting donors and civilians, the kind of PR-friendly event the Navy often used to keep funding flowing. But this time he made sure Elena Cole's name was on the list. He pulled strings, made calls, and ensured her invitation was sent. When the day arrived, the visitors once again gathered at the base. And just as he had hoped, Elena appeared, dressed simply as before, her demeanor calm and quiet. She greeted the officers politely, gave no sign of recognizing the tension in Jackson's eyes. This time, however, Jackson had a plan. Instead of drills or sparring, he announced a live simulation exercise. The visitors would watch as SEALs ran through a mock combat scenario. Urban warfare, hostage rescue, everything staged but realistic enough to impress. And then, at the last moment, he turned to Elena. "Care to join us?" he asked, his voice dripping with challenge. The visitors gasped, intrigued. The SEALs looked at one another uneasily. Elena studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. "All right." Jackson smiled coldly. This time there would be no simple tricks, no lucky shots. This time she would be thrown into a world only soldiers could handle. And when she failed, when she stumbled and broke in front of everyone, he would reclaim everything she had taken from him. But deep down, a shadow of doubt gnawed at him. Because as calm as she looked, as simple as she appeared, part of him wondered if he was walking straight into her game instead of the other way around. The visitors buzzed with excitement as the sergeant briefed them on what they were about to see. A simulation exercise was a rare treat, the kind of demonstration normally reserved for military brass or congressional committees. It would showcase the precision and lethality of a SEAL unit in action. Room clearing, hostage rescue, neutralizing hostile threats in an urban combat setting. Jackson stood tall in front of them, every inch the officer in control, his voice carrying with sharp authority as he described the scenario. "This is what separates us from everyone else," he declared, his gaze flicking briefly toward Elena. "You'll see why only the best of the best can handle missions like these. No hesitation, no mistakes, no excuses." The visitors nodded eagerly, some whispering among themselves. Elena stood quietly near the back of the group, hands folded loosely, her calm demeanor unchanged. She hadn't protested when Jackson invited her to participate. She hadn't even hesitated. That bothered him more than anything. He had expected her to decline, to back down in front of an audience. Instead, she had stepped forward, unflinching, and now she was moments away from walking into a simulation that would chew most civilians to pieces. The sergeant handed her a training rifle, identical in weight and feel to the real thing, but loaded with simulation rounds. She checked it with the same quiet precision she had shown before, her fingers moving in patterns too practiced to be coincidental. Some of the SEALs noticed and frowned. Jackson ignored them, telling himself it didn't matter. He was about to watch her stumble, to finally watch her fail. The simulation began. The first room erupted with noise, shouts, simulated gunfire, the crack of rounds hitting walls. The SEAL team moved as a machine, each man sweeping angles, calling out targets, covering each other. Visitors gasped at the speed, the coordination. Then, to everyone's surprise, Elena moved with them. Not behind, not clumsily, but in perfect rhythm. She slipped through the doorway low and quick, her weapon steady, eyes sharp. A target popped up from behind a barrier. She dropped it in a heartbeat. Another appeared across the room, 2 clean shots before it could register. She wasn't just participating. She was leading. The SEAL nearest her, Davis, felt a chill as he realized she was calling angles before he did. "2 left corner low," she snapped, her voice precise and controlled. He pivoted and fired, and sure enough, a target popped exactly where she had said. He hit it, but his heart was hammering. How had she known? They cleared the first room in half the time it normally took. The visitors were already clapping, whispering in astonishment. Jackson's jaw tightened. He had expected hesitation, confusion. Instead, she was thriving. The team pushed into the second section of the course, a tight hallway leading into multiple adjoining rooms. This was where most errors happened, where even trained men sometimes lost tempo. Jackson watched with narrowed eyes as Elena slid into point position without hesitation. "Stack right," she ordered quietly, her tone carrying authority that made the men move before they could think. They flowed behind her as though it were natural. She kicked through the doorway, her weapon snapping left, then right. 2 targets dropped instantly. Her movements weren't wild or rushed, they were surgical, controlled. She never fired more than she needed. Every shot landed. By the time they reached the mock hostage room, the visitors were no longer murmuring, they were openly staring, mouths agape. Elena entered low, scanning faster than the rest, her rifle already tracking the hostile, near the hostage dummy. 1 controlled shot, target neutralized. No hesitation. The timer beeped. The simulation was over. The sergeant called out the result. 4 minutes, 29 seconds. 0 hostages hit. All threats neutralized. Gasps rippled through the crowd. That was faster than most SEAL teams completed the course. Clean, precise, efficient. And she had been at the center of it. Jackson's face flushed red. He stepped forward quickly, his voice sharp. No. That doesn't count. She was following us, copying movements she saw. That's all. This was a team effort. She was carried by the rest of the unit. But even as he said it, he saw the doubt in his men's eyes. They knew better. They had felt it. She hadn't followed them. They had followed her. Her commands, her instincts, her movements, they had been in her rhythm, not the other way around. Davis finally spoke, his voice low but firm. Sir, with respect, she wasn't following. She was leading. The visitors erupted into applause, some even cheering as Elena lowered her weapon and set it carefully aside. She turned to Jackson, her expression calm as ever. It seems I can handle this too. Jackson's hands trembled with fury. He had orchestrated this, planned it as the moment to reclaim his pride, and instead it had backfired spectacularly. Every attempt to expose her only revealed more of her skill, more of her calm mastery. He was no longer just embarrassed, he was being overshadowed. Captain Harris, who had arrived to observe the exercise quietly, stepped forward now.